You probably know Bill Nye best as TV's science guy, but more recently he's turned his attention to debunking ideas of creationism. It's all laid out in his new book, Undeniable: Evolution and the Science of Creation. And Bill Nye joins us now via Skype from Los Angeles, California. It's great to have you back on TVO, a place you spent a lot of time back in the day. Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you. Seriously, everybody, really appreciate the support of TV Ontario.
Not at all. We were very happy to have you on all those years ago. How appropriate do you think it is to teach creationism to children?
It's completely inappropriate in science class. Now, if you want to teach it in the history of religion or fascinating human undertakings, creation myths that turned out not to be true, 101, then that's fine. But it's not science. It's nothing to do with the way we know nature.
Well, let me ask the obvious follow-up, and that is, what's the harm?
Oh, then you raise a generation of kids. You have the potential for raising a generation of kids. It doesn't understand how we have everything that we have, how we have food, how we have electronics that allow us to have this video conversation through the internet across a continent. It's none of this would be possible without the discoveries that were made through the process of science. When you try to embrace the ideas of creationists, as I understand it, who insist apparently that the Earth is 6 or somehow 10,000 years old, that's completely inconsistent with the scientific method and everything that we know. And so you just don't want to have kids growing up with this conflict, this worldview that's wrong.
You once said in another interview that, quote, we're raising a generation of students that can't think at a time when we need them more than ever. So tell us, how would teaching creationism stunt their growth or prevent them from thinking more than ever?
So here's what you want in science. Here's what you want as a human, whether or not you're a scientist or whatever you do. You want to discover the laws of nature that are true everywhere throughout the universe. And the examples that are easy enough are gravity, molecules, chemistry, then the fundamentals of life science. Now, in biology, the biggest idea, the main idea in all of biology is evolution. So by not teaching that fundamental idea in perhaps you could, certainly biologists claim it's the most important aspect of science, you're trying to raise people who have a worldview that's inconsistent with everything they observe. In other words, why would we be able to use radioactivity to generate electric power if there's no such thing as radioactivity to be discovered in rocks that indicate the age of the Earth? How would that be possible? How would you have light from stars that are clearly more than 6,000 light years away if all of the stars and everything in between was created 6,000 years ago? It's completely inconsistent with nature.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but humor me for a second here. Here in the province of Ontario, we do have two fully publicly funded school systems. We have a publicly funded secular system and a publicly funded Catholic school system, and that was part of the original deal that gave us our country since 1867. It's been in place ever since then.
Sons of a common mother.
There you go. One wonders, though, why it would be harmful to those students to learn all of the things in science class that you're talking about, while at the same time, maybe 5 minutes at the end of science class, say, you do know, boys and girls, it is part of your faith to believe in God, and here's what God tells us about that. Is that confusing for kids?
Catholic Church is not the same as the creationists here in the United States in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The Pope, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, came out saying, evolution is this great thing. It's completely consistent with our church philosophy and what we believe in. And so that's the Catholic Church doesn't have this issue, at least as far as I can tell. These are extraordinary people that we encounter here in the United States that deny everything that we observe in nature. The Pope in the Catholic Church, as I understand it, is separate from that.
Okay, good. Well, you know, of course, the Catholic Church and science also have had their moments throughout history, although perhaps not more latterly.
But the Vatican has its own astronomer, for crying out loud. I mean, so many scientific discoveries were made by Jesuit priests. I mean, you can't, if I may, deny that. So that's all. The Catholic Church is not exceptional the way these creationists in the United States are.
Okay, I understand the distinction. Here again, another quote from your book. Inherent in the rejection of evolution is the idea that your curiosity about the world is misplaced and your common sense is wrong. This attack on reason is an attack on all of us. What do you mean by it's an attack on all of us?
In other words, everything that the rest of us do as taxpayers and voters and citizens of the world, everything that we do to improve the lives of other people or to improve our own quality of life, to build buildings that rely on our understanding of physics, to build sewer systems that rely on our understanding of gravity, that all of this is inconsistent with this other world view that where they take the Bible literally, as written in English, by the way, take that literally and deny everything else that gives us all these wonderful things that our society provides, food, clothing, and shelter. So when you are attacking our science or our ancestors who made these discoveries about nature, you are, for me, attacking all of us who embrace it and use it and want to make the world better.
So are you urging people to give up on the idea of creationism?
Oh, yeah, please. Now, keep in mind that if you're a grown-up, if you're an adult, and you've been raised with this creationist point of view, it's very, very difficult for you to let go of that. In the Mormon church, they call it losing your testimony. It's very, very difficult for that, but to let go of that. But for kids, they grow up with this conflict. Everything they see in nature, all the cool video games they enjoy, the cars they ride around, and they're a result of science. And yet they will have grown-ups, adults, insisting that the fundamental way we learned all that is wrong. And everybody else who embraces those fundamental things that we've discovered in nature is wrong, and there's something wrong with them. And it's the kids that concern me, because when it comes to climate change, for example, we need all the brains we can get to address this problem. So if we raise a generation of science students that doesn't believe in science, it's a formula for disaster.
Do you think this is an American phenomenon solely, or does this go around the world?
Well, it goes around the world. The guy Ken Ham here in the United States was from Australia. And between you and me and all of your viewers, there's something going on in Canada that is odd to the rest of us. You know, if you look at satellite images of Alberta from space, about a quarter of the province has been denuded, has been leveled. Destroyed, or the ecosystem been destroyed. About a third of the forest has been destroyed in Alberta for the sake of getting this bitumen out. And I can understand it because it seemed like it would make a lot of money. But we have climate change now. It's the worst of both worlds. You're destroying the ecosystems that provide oxygen for everybody to breathe. By everybody, I mean living things on the surface. And then we are burning the oil, producing more carbon dioxide than we would any other way. And by the way, it's the most carbon dioxide intensive oil around. You got to burn up to 30% of it to get it melted enough so you can pump it. And so I know that, rather, my sense as a guy in the United States who visits Canada quite often, I was there 3 times this fall. My sense is that the Canadian government is not entirely in touch with the wants of the Canadian people, especially when it comes to First Nations people. And so I'm hoping that as the price of liquid petroleum, of gasoline and petrol, falls as a result of all the natural gas that's being mined, I hope everybody will rethink the efficacy or the real long-term effect of denuding these enormous landscape, these enormous areas of Alberta for the sake of the short-term gain of oil.
I was just about to say, at $40 a barrel, it becomes very uneconomical to try to get that oil out of the ground.
Now,
So You may not have to worry about that much longer.
Up. I mean, everybody knows the sodium price fluctuates. I got you. But along this line, the people, at least here in the United States, the people who insist on creationism, the Earth is 6,000 years old, also deny climate change. It's a big deal with them, with Ken Ham and those guys.
Well, since you mentioned Ken Ham, let's play it. We've got some tape of him here. He, of course, runs this Creationist Museum in Kentucky, where you referenced earlier. You guys actually had a bit of a moment. So let's play this tape, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
What keeps the United States ahead, what makes the United States a world leader, is our technology, our new ideas, our innovations. If we continue to eschew science, eschew the process, and try to divide science into observational science and historic science, we are not going to move forward. We will not embrace natural laws. We will not make discoveries. We will not invent and innovate and stay ahead.
Okay, so you went into the heart of the lion's den there to take him on his home turf. And I wonder about this, though. You know, the United States is still, you know, #1 in post-secondary institutions, #1 in patents, #1 in scientific advances. It's #1 in so many of the big scientific categories. It's also #1 in Jesus, right? It's #1 in creationism. It's #1 in people who believe that the Bible is the literal word of God. So
it's translated into English in the 20th century. I mean, I don't know what it really said in Sanskrit or Hebrew or one of the earlier texts, you know.
But I guess the point is, America seems to be doing okay, even though it's following both of these tracks, both science and creationism. No?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So in the top tier, well, you probably have heard of places like Harvard, Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, Stanford, Cornell.
Where you went, yes?
Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, Caltech, in those places, California Institute of Technology, sure enough, the United States is producing top-level students, top-level graduates, Nobel laureates, and stuff like that. But in the middle grades, in most of the educational system in the U.S., the United States is falling behind because science education isn't as good as it could, or if I can use the term, should be. And so this is a deep concern. I mean, the top level is doing okay, but the systems that feed the top level are not doing okay. And to have this enormous, I mean, this guy, the Creation Museum, as they call it, by the way, it's not a museum the way you think of a museum. There are no artifacts there. There's nothing from the past there. They're all sort of dioramas or robotic displays. But that aside, that organization, Answers in Genesis, gets millions and millions of dollars from someplace. And their supporters who generally deny science, the process by which we have this technology we're using right now, and especially deny climate change at a time when we really can't afford to do that.
Well, let me just make sure I understand that point. Are you saying you can draw a straight line between those who deny science, those who believe in creationism, and you just draw that line and it leads you inevitably to being a climate science denier or a climate change denier?
Well, the leaders of that organization certainly are those people. I mean, they say the Earth is cooling, which is wrong. 2014 was the hottest year on record. And so they're just obviously wrong. And this is where people in the progressive side are very frustrated. Is so-called the term you'll hear a lot in the U.S. right now, hyphenated, is fact-based. Their view of the world is not fact-based. It's sort of wishfully thinking-based. And it's bad because of the future.
Well,
it's going to be affected.
You know, I've got a guy who emails me all the time, probably once or twice a week, trying to make the case that, you know, there's this grand conspiracy to advance an agenda in favor of climate change, when in his view it isn't really happening. And when that story came out that you just pointed out, that the last year was the hottest year on record, he'll say, well, yeah, we've kept records for 150 years. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Has he got a point?
No. Two things. First of all, it's not just that the Earth was once warmer and there was once more carbon dioxide in the time of the ancient dinosaurs. There was warmer and there's a little more carbon dioxide. It's the speed. It's the rate at which the world is getting warmer. That is the concern. the rate at which things are changing, we will not be able to keep up if we stay on this trajectory. Then to his first point, a conspiracy theory is lazy. I'm sorry, sir, but if only there were a small group of people in charge controlling things and messing things. That's not how it rolls, man. I'm sorry. It's just people everywhere. When I was a kid, there were 3 billion people in the world. I remember when it changed. It was big news. It changed from 2.9999999 to 3 billion people in the world. Now there's 7.2 billion people. In my lifetime, it is substantially more than doubled. And that's the problem. The atmosphere is extraordinarily thin when as viewed from space, and there's 7 billion people burning it and breathing it, and that's why we're changing the climate. I'm sorry, it's not a conspiracy. If only it were that simple. It's just, that's kind of a lazy, I'm sorry, sir, there's just a lazy way of looking at the world. There is nobody in charge screwing things up. It's a bunch of people running around doing what they want.
I will email him back and let him know that that's what you've had to say about this.
He probably watches broadcasts like this. That's
yes, indeed.
He did what I could to speak to him directly.
All right, on the issue of, I get it, you don't want the schools teaching this stuff, or if they do it in religion class, that's one thing, but certainly not in science class. But I guess alongside that, do you also need parents to stop teaching this to their kids as well? Because obviously, if you're from a religious family, presumably you're going to be hearing this at home as well as at school, yes?
I just really want to, in general, it's not religion that's teaching creationism. It's a special subset of a certain religion that's teaching creationism. I just really want to say it's not a broad brush on that. And so, yeah, our problem is when parents are brought up with this extraordinary worldview, they bring their kids up with these extraordinary worldviews, and it's really hard to change when you're a grown-up. I mean, it's harder than quitting smoking or what have you. And so our trouble is, for a society that needs as many scientifically literate people as possible, and I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking about the world, Canada especially, we need as many people who are literate, who can make good decisions as voters about what's reasonable, what's a good thing to do, what's not a good thing to do, what we need to put our resources into, what we should not put our resources into. We need those people to understand science well enough to make good decisions. And of course, we need engineers and scientists to change the world.
We showed that clip earlier of you going into Kentucky, into Ken Ham's quote-unquote museum to take him on. Any trepidation about doing that? You really did put yourself sort of in the middle of a potentially hostile crowd when you did that.
If you stop being nervous, quit doing it. So yeah, you absolutely are nervous. But what you try to do, I'm talking about theater, or if you're on television, you try to take that nervousness and turn it into excitement. And I was very confident in my facts, very confident in my ability to keep my cool. And so I wanted to be in the lion's den, and sure enough, because of the remarkable resources that they have, and by that I mean money, they publicized this thing like crazy to the point where people in Ontario watched it. Things had almost 4 million views. I mean, there's not that many webcasts of any kind that get 4 million views. Right? You're getting up into the spacecraft landing on a comet kind of numbers, and so it's really a remarkable thing. It shows you how interested people around the world are in the nature of scientific discovery and this belief system, this creationism, and this sort of lack of understanding or lack of traditional teaching of evolution. Evolution is the main idea in biology, and we have a huge number of people around the world who aren't familiar with it. So I wrote this book. I'm a mechanical engineer, okay? I mean, I tell everybody I took a lot of physics. Well, what do you know about biology? Well, I know enough. I wrote a book that's a primer about some fundamental ideas we should all know about in evolution. And I say, when you realize that you're going to die, I'm the first to admit that, that kind of sucks, if I may use the term. It's very troubling, but it's part of the process of life. And the process of life is described and a result of evolution. And so we all want to understand it. And I guess that's why so many millions of people have taken such a deep interest in this.
Now, you say, of course, that you answered his charges, or his side of the argument, with science, with facts. And of course, he says the same thing. He says, and his company's called Answers in Genesis, and he had one of his companies publish a review of his side of the debate, which said the following. It said, Ken answered the harder questions with scripture, reason, and data, while Bill Nye often answered the hard questions with, it's a great mystery, or don't know. When you're dealing with kids on these things and you're trying to get kids to see your side of the argument, who's got the easier case to make?
Well, this is, to me, in the larger picture, science is the easier case to make, because what you want in any scientific theory, and this is the traditional scientific use of the word theory, you want to be able to make predictions. You want to be able to, because of these facts, we can now tell you that this is going to happen. Well, in Ken Ham and those guys, in their worldview, they can make no predictions. They have what would be described as a just so story. In other words, they create a thing that is self-consistent. In this case, a deity created not only the world that we know, but the entire universe in a moment, or 7 days, and 6 days, I guess, and he took a day off at the end. And he created everything that you can see in that same moment, or those same moments, so that is logically consistent, but is not consistent when you think about it, as we say, critically. Like, is that very reasonable? That stars were put there and light was put into space between us and the stars to fool us, or to trick us, or to make us think that it was all done at once. It's just not reasonable. And so I use that term many times. So one of the remarkable things discovered in my lifetime, this is by way of example. When I was young, taking physics and so on, people were studying the universe. And the universe has been discovered to be expanding. This is the Big Bang, discovered by Edwin Hubble on about 1927. Universe is expanding. And people thought the universe then has enough gravity to slow down, and the universe would slow down. And would the universe stop and collapse again? Would the universe slow down, slow down, slow down forever and never stop slowing down? Well, it turns out the universe is accelerating. That was discovered and published in about 2004. And do you know why the universe is accelerating? Nobody knows why. And so for us in science, that's wonderful and exciting and drives us forward. And we want to make discoveries. We want to build instruments to study the universe and find out why it's accelerating and learn more about our place in space, our place in the cosmos. But the creationists, as far as I can tell, don't want to do any of that. They want it to just be just so. They want to close the book and say, that settles it, I'm done. And they want to teach that to their kids so that they do not make the discoveries that will change the world. They do not learn about the cosmos, our place in space. They do not make the next scientific discovery that will enable us to create enough energy and produce enough food and potable water for the 7+ billions of people in the world. They just want to check out, tune out, not get involved. And that's very troubling for those of us who are trying to leave the world better than we found it.
I know I can speak on behalf of millions of kids who've never been able to tune out when you speak, Bill Nye, science guy, as you did for so many years on TVO. Thanks again for joining us on Ontario's public broadcasters. Great to have you along again.
Thanks again.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.